They destroyed my farm to build a road. Now their HOA president is facing jail time. The HOA faked permits, bulldozed my land, and thought they could steamroll over me. So I took them to court, exposed their fraud, proved they stole HOA funds, and got their corrupt president kicked out. Now, the road is gone. The HOA is under new leadership, and their old boss? Facing criminal charges. The first thing Jake Callahan noticed that morning was the rumble. A deep, guttural vibration rolling through the earth, strong enough to shake the picture frames on his bedroom wall. At first, he thought it was thunder, a storm rolling in earlier than expected. But then came the metallic clank of heavy machinery, followed by the unmistakable beep-beep-beep of a truck reversing. That wasn't thunder. Jake threw off his covers, adrenaline already surging through his veins. Something wasn't right. His farm, Callahan Acres, had been in his family for 3 generations. No one should be on his land, let alone with construction equipment. Pulling on his boots and grabbing his flannel shirt off the chair, he pushed through the front door and froze. His fields were being torn apart. Just past the gravel driveway, where his winter wheat had been planted barely 2 months ago, bulldozers ripped through the soil like it was nothing more than loose sand. Earth movers rolled over the fields, flattening everything in their path. Large industrial trucks sat parked on what had once been lush farmland, their tires sinking deep into the mud. For a second, Jake thought he was still dreaming, some kind of twisted nightmare where his family's land was disappearing right in front of him. Then the anger hit. Hard. What the hell is going on? He shouted, storming across the yard toward the destruction. Workers in bright orange vests and hard hats barely spared him a glance as they continued shouting instructions over the roar of machinery. A man operating a backhoe turned briefly to acknowledge him before going right back to tearing into the soil. Jake felt his blood pressure spike. He marched straight toward the closest worker, a stocky guy in his 40s who was casually leaning against a truck, sipping coffee like it was just another Tuesday. "You," Jake snapped. "Who gave you permission to be on my land? What the hell are you doing here?" The man didn't even flinch. He lowered his cup and squinted at Jake like he had better things to do than deal with an angry landowner. "You the owner?" he asked, voice bored. Jake clenched his fists. "Damn right I am. Jake Callahan. And you're trespassing. Now tell me what's going on before I call the sheriff." The worker sighed, as if Jake was the inconvenience here. Then, with a lazy motion, he jabbed a thumb toward a white trailer parked near the site. "Talk to the boss," he said. "Mr. Langley handles all that paperwork stuff." Jake didn't need to ask who Mr. Langley was. Martin Langley, the homeowners association president. Jake felt a fresh wave of anger boil up inside him. Langley had been a thorn in everyone's side for years, but this was something else entirely. Without another word, he turned toward the trailer, his boots sinking into the churned-up mud as he marched toward the man responsible for this mess. He wasn't going to let this stand. Jake yanked the trailer door open without knocking, his pulse hammering in his ears. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and cheap cologne. A desk sat in the center of the cramped space, covered in neatly stacked paperwork, a laptop, and a half-eaten sandwich. Behind it, dressed in an expensive suit that looked completely out of place on a construction site, sat Martin Langley. He didn't even flinch at Jake's entrance, just glanced up from his screen with the same smirk he always wore when he was about to feed someone a load of bureaucratic nonsense. "You've got about 5 seconds to explain what the hell is happening to my farm," Jake snapped, planting his hands on the desk hard enough to rattle the coffee cup sitting next to Langley's laptop. "And don't even try to act like you had permission, because you sure as hell didn't get it from me." Langley sighed, adjusting his tie like this whole conversation was a mild inconvenience. "Mr. Callahan," he said smoothly, leaning back in his chair, "I was wondering when you'd come storming in here. I assure you, everything is in order. This land has been allocated for a public easement. The city approved the project, and the homeowners association has the right to proceed with construction." Jake's hands curled into fists. "Allocated by who? I own this land. There's no easement. You can't just come in here and rip up my fields." Langley barely reacted. Instead, he slid a single sheet of paper across the desk, tapping it with his finger like it was the gospel truth. "Here's the permit. All officially signed and processed. If you have a problem, take it up with the city." Jake snatched the document off the desk and scanned it. His stomach turned. The signatures looked rushed, almost like they'd been scribbled on in a hurry. The formatting was off, nothing like the legal documents he'd dealt with when registering his farm years ago. The HOA stamp was on the bottom, but it looked sloppy, like someone had thrown it together overnight. "This is bull," Jake said, tossing the paper back at Langley. I never agreed to any easement, and this sure as hell isn't a city-issued document. Either you forged this, or you pushed it through some backdoor deal. Which is it? Langley's smirk deepened, his fingers steepling together like he enjoyed watching Jake lose his temper. Those are very serious accusations, Mr. Callahan. I'd be careful about throwing words like forged around. But if you insist on halting construction, I hope you're prepared for a lengthy legal battle. The HOA has deep pockets, and we don't take kindly to obstruction. Jake felt his blood boil. This was exactly the kind of arrogant, corporate garbage he'd expected from Langley, but seeing it firsthand, watching this man act like he owned the land Jake had spent his entire life maintaining, made his skin crawl. He'd heard stories of the HOA pulling shady stunts before fining homeowners for things as small as the wrong color mailbox, bullying elderly residents into compliance. But this was theft, plain and simple. Without another word, Jake turned on his heel and pushed out of the trailer, slamming the door behind him. He could still hear the construction equipment roaring in the distance, the sound of his land being torn apart like it was nothing. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jake drove into town with his jaw clenched so tight it felt like his teeth might crack. The HOA had messed with the wrong man. He wasn't about to roll over and let Langley steal his land with some half-baked, fraudulent permit. He needed someone who knew how to tear apart a legal document the way a combine tore through a wheat field. And there was only one person in town he trusted for that, Sarah Whitmore, Sarah's office was in a small, brick building just off Main Street, sandwiched between a diner and a hardware store. The kind of place where the coffee was always cold, and the receptionist barely looked up when Jake walked in. He didn't need an appointment. Sarah had been handling legal disputes in town for years, and she had a reputation for going after people like Langley with a vengeance. If anyone could help him, it was her. The door to her office was open, and she was already flipping through a stack of papers when Jake stepped inside. Sarah was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, with no patience for nonsense. She didn't bother with fake pleasantries, just looked up and nodded. "Jake," she said, setting the papers down. "I heard about what's happening on your farm. Figured you'd be in soon." Jake tossed the permit onto her desk. "Tell me this isn't legal." Sarah picked it up, eyes scanning the document. Her frown deepened as she flipped it over, checking the seals, the formatting, the signatures. By the time she set it down, her expression had hardened into something cold and dangerous. "This is garbage." Jake felt the first flicker of relief in hours. "I knew it." She tapped the HOA's signature at the bottom. "For starters, this isn't even formatted like an official city permit. The signatures don't match the ones I've seen on real HOA approvals, and the document itself is missing key authorization stamps. Whoever put this together was either sloppy or thought you wouldn't bother to check." She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "This is fraudulent as hell, Jake. Langley is trying to strong-arm you into compliance." Jake exhaled slowly, his fists unclenching for the first time all day. "What are my options?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "We file a cease and desist order immediately. That'll force them to stop construction until this permit is properly reviewed. In the meantime, I'll start digging. If Langley faked this document, there's a paper trail somewhere, and I intend to find it." Jake nodded. This was exactly what he needed, someone who knew how to fight. But he also knew Langley wouldn't back down easily. He threatened legal action, he said. "Told me the HOA has deep pockets and that I'd be in for a long fight if I got in their way." Sarah smirked. "Let him try. If he wants to take this to court, we'll bury him. But first, let's see how he reacts when he gets served." She grabbed a legal pad and started scribbling down notes. Jake didn't say another word. He just sat back and watched, feeling something he hadn't since he'd seen those bulldozers tearing through his land. Hope. The more Jake dug into the HOA, the uglier the picture became. After leaving Sarah's office, he decided to take a drive around the neighborhood, checking in with the people he'd known his whole life. If Langley was bold enough to forcibly tear through his farm, there was no way this was an isolated incident. He needed to know exactly who he was up against. His first stop was Tom and Evelyn Carter's house, just a couple of miles down the road. They'd lived in the area for over 30 years, their small ranch-style home sitting on a tidy plot of land with a garden Evelyn had spent decades perfecting. They were the kind of people who had always minded their own business, but when Jake mentioned the HOA, Tom's expression darkened instantly. "Langley," Tom scoffed, setting down his coffee cup with a little too much force. "That man is a damn vulture." Evelyn nodded, her wrinkled hands gripping the edge of the table like she was holding back years of frustration. "They tried to fine us $3,000 last year over a garden shed. Jake frowned. A shed? Tom's jaw tightened. Said it wasn't aesthetic enough for the neighborhood. Mind you, this place has been here long before Langley and his HOA goons came in. We built that shed with our own hands 20 years ago. But suddenly, they sent us a notice claiming it violated some new regulation. Told us we either had to tear it down or pay the fine. Jake shook his head. What did you do? Tom exhaled through his nose, the kind of breath that carried the weight of a long fight with a system that didn't care. We fought it. Hired a lawyer. HOA backed off eventually, but it cost us months of stress and thousands in legal fees. They do this to people, Jake. They push, threaten, and harass, hoping folks will cave. Not everyone can afford to fight back. Evelyn sighed. Some of our neighbors lost everything trying to keep up with their ridiculous demands. You remember the Johnsons? They were forced to repaint their house 3 times in 2 years because the HOA kept changing the color guidelines. Cost them thousands. They finally packed up and left. Jake leaned back in his chair, the weight of their words pressing down on him. This wasn't just about his farm anymore. This was a pattern, a long history of bullying, manipulation, and abuse of power. And Langley was right at the center of it. Anyone else been hit hard? Jake asked, already knowing the answer. Tom nodded. Plenty. You should talk to the Andersons. They got fined for parking their truck in their own damn driveway. Then there's the Martinez family. HOA tried to make them tear down a place that they built for their kids, said it was a visual nuisance. Jake's hands curled into fists. And no one's done anything? Evelyn gave a sad smile. People have tried. But the HOA uses legal threats to wear folks down. And when that doesn't work, they send out smear letters, telling the neighborhood that someone's damaging property values or acting against community interests. They turn people against each other. By the time anyone figures out the truth, it's too late. Jake exhaled slowly. Everything they were saying fit exactly with what Langley had tried pulling on him. But now, Jake had something Langley probably wasn't expecting, ****, a network of people ready to push back. ****. I'm not letting them get away with this, he said, standing up. Not this time. Tom met his gaze, something flickering behind his eyes. Hope. It had been missing for a long time, buried under years of intimidation and fear. But for the first time in a while, it was back. We're with you, Jake, Tom said firmly. Whatever you need. Jake nodded. This fight had just gotten bigger, and he was ready for it. Jake didn't waste any time. After hearing Tom and Evelyn's story, he knew there had to be more people in the neighborhood who had been screwed over by the HOA. It was one thing for Langley to pull his usual petty harassment, ridiculous fines, absurd rules, but tearing through private farmland? That was a whole different level of corruption. ****, Langley was getting bolder, and Jake wasn't about to let him get away with it. By the end of the week, he had a list of names. People who had been bullied, threatened, fined, or forced into unnecessary renovations under the HOA's so-called authority. He made calls, knocked on doors, and listened to story after story, ****, people losing savings over arbitrary rules, homeowners forced to repaint their houses multiple times, elderly residents pressured into paying thousands for violations. That didn't even exist. ***, some had tried fighting back, but most just gave up when faced with legal threats from Langley and his team. But now, they had a reason to fight. Jake called a meeting. His farm. Saturday, ***, word spread fast, and by the time the sun started setting that evening, over 24 people had shown up. Some stood in small groups, talking in hushed voices, while others came straight up to Jake, ready to lay everything out in the open. Tom and Evelyn were there, along with James and Linda Anderson, the couple fined for parking in their own driveway. The Martinez family had shown up too, frustrated about their kids' playset being targeted. More and more people spoke up, sharing their own horror stories of how the HOA had bled them dry for years. Sarah arrived just as the crowd started settling in. She wasn't one for speeches, so she got straight to the point. I've been digging into the HOA's financials, she said, flipping open her folder. And what I found isn't just shady, it's illegal. The crowd went silent. Sarah pulled out a copy of the HOA's financial records. Public information, but buried under layers of bureaucracy most homeowners wouldn't know how to navigate. The HOA is collecting way more money than it should be. Dues, fines, special assessments. But where's it going? She flipped a page and tapped the document. Turns out, a significant portion of those funds have been labeled under vague miscellaneous expenses. No paper trail, no breakdown of where the money is actually going. Jake folded his arms. And let me guess, Langley's signature is all over it. Sarah smirked. Bingo. The realization rippled through the group. People had suspected the HOA was corrupt, but this wasn't just overreach. Asterisk asterisk, this was theft. Asterisk asterisk, Langley had been lining his own pockets while pretending to enforce community standards. The tension in the air shifted. What had started as frustration turned into outright fury. This son of a bitch has been robbing us, James Anderson muttered, shaking his head. Linda crossed her arms. And we've just been letting him? Jake took a step forward, his voice steady. Not anymore. The HOA has been running this neighborhood like a damn dictatorship, and Langley thinks he's untouchable. But if we work together, if we bring this to light, he won't be able to keep covering it up. Sarah nodded. I'm filing a formal complaint with the city first thing Monday. If we can prove financial misconduct, the HOA could face a full audit. That means we need every single record, email, and letter you've received from them. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case. People started pulling out files, old notices, HOA letters they had been too afraid to challenge before. What was once a scattered group of frustrated homeowners was now a unified front. Jake looked at them, saw the determination in their faces. Langley had spent years pushing these people around, thinking he was untouchable. But he'd made one mistake. Asterisk asterisk, he went after the wrong man. Asterisk asterisk. This wasn't just about his farm anymore. This was about taking Langley down. Jake had been patient. He'd done everything by the book, talked to a lawyer, gathered evidence, filed complaints. But none of it had stopped the destruction. The construction continued every day, the bulldozers clawing deeper into his land like they had every right to be there. The cease and desist order hadn't done a damn thing. The HOA had money, power, and a system rigged in their favor, and Langley knew it. If Jake wanted to stop them, he had to do it himself. Early that morning, before the crews arrived, he dragged out the barricades. They weren't fancy, just wooden beams, old steel barrels, and whatever else he could scrounge up. But they were enough to block the path where the construction crews had been driving in and out. He parked his truck across the main access road, then planted two massive signs in the ground: private property and no trespassing. When the first work trucks rolled up an hour later, the drivers honked, expecting him to move. He didn't. They got out, walked up to him, and demanded he step aside. He crossed his arms. Not happening. You're trespassing. The workers didn't argue. They weren't the ones making the decisions. They just turned around and made a call. Langley arrived less than 20 minutes later. He pulled up in his overpriced SUV, stepped out in his neatly pressed suit, and strutted over like he owned the place. His face was a perfect mask of smugness and irritation, the kind of look a man wears when he's used to always getting his way. Jake, he said smoothly, stopping a few feet away, his hands in his pockets like this was just another business meeting. I have to say, this is a bold move. But let's be honest, you're not going to win this. Jake held his ground. You've already lost, Langley. That permit's a fraud. The city's looking into it. And in the meantime, no one's setting foot on my land. Langley sighed, shaking his head like he was disappointed in a misbehaving child. Jake, I warned you what would happen if you interfered. You think those barricades are going to stop us? You think you can just plant your feet and say no? He chuckled, adjusting his cufflinks. You're fighting a losing battle. The HOA has resources, and we have the law on our side. All you're doing is making things worse for yourself. Jake narrowed his eyes. If you had the law on your side, you wouldn't have had to forge that permit. That hit a nerve. Langley's smirk twitched, but he quickly covered it up. You're making a mistake, Callahan. You're standing in the way of community progress. And when this is over, you're going to be the one paying the price. Jake tilted his head. Yeah? Go ahead. Sue me. See how that works out. Langley's lips pressed into a thin line, his jaw tightening for just a second before he forced another smile. I don't need to sue you, Jake. The neighborhood is already turning against you. And that's when Jake knew Langley had already started his next move. The smear campaign began the very next day. Flyers appeared in mailboxes around the neighborhood, full of carefully worded accusations designed to make Jake look like the enemy. They claimed he was anti-community, selfish, unwilling to cooperate for the betterment of the neighborhood. Some even suggested that by blocking the construction, he was personally costing homeowners money by delaying an approved development project. Langley knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to turn the people against him, make them see him as an obstacle instead of the victim. Jake saw the shift immediately. Neighbors who had been friendly now avoided eye contact. A few of them looked genuinely torn, like they didn't know who to believe. Others had already taken the bait. He caught more than a few dirty looks when he stopped by the gas station. He knew how this game worked. Langley had power, and power meant control over the narrative. But Jake had something Langley didn't prove, and he wasn't done fighting. Not even close. Sarah called Jake late in the evening, her voice sharp and urgent. "I found it," she said without preamble. Langley's not just bending the rules, he's stealing from the HOA. Jake gripped his phone tighter. He had been expecting something shady, but outright theft, that was another level. "How bad?" he asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. Sarah exhaled. "Bad. The permit? It's completely forged. The signatures don't match city records, and the supposed approval was never actually processed by the city. But that's just the beginning. I went through the HOA's financial reports, and guess what? Tens of thousands of dollars marked under infrastructure improvement projects. No breakdown, no receipts, just vague expenses. And the contractor they hired? Turns out, it's a company Langley has direct financial ties to." Jake closed his eyes for a second, letting the anger settle before it boiled over. "So he's been funneling money through fake projects," he muttered, "using HOA funds to pay himself." Sarah's voice was ice cold. "Exactly. And that road? It's not about community development. It's about lining his own damn pockets." That was all Jake needed to hear. It was time to go public. The town hall meeting was packed. Word had spread fast that something big was about to drop, and even the homeowners who had been skeptical of Jake's fight showed up, eager to hear what was happening. Langley sat near the front, perfectly composed, his expensive watch glinting under the fluorescent lights. He looked confident, maybe a little too confident. He had spent years intimidating and manipulating people, and he clearly thought tonight would be no different. Jake stepped forward, looking out at the crowd. His neighbors, many of whom had been misled, bullied, or outright robbed by the HOA, deserved to know the truth. "I know a lot of you have been told that I'm standing in the way of progress," he began, keeping his voice steady. "That I'm fighting against something that's supposed to help the community. But that's not what's happening, and I have the proof to show it." He turned to Sarah, who handed him the documents. "The permit Langley used to justify bulldozing my farm?" Jake held up the paper. Asterisk, it's a fake. Asterisk, the city never approved it. And more than that, I have financial records showing that HOA money, asterisk, your money, asterisk, has been going straight into his pockets." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people leaned forward, eyes narrowing, while others exchanged uncertain glances. But before anyone could say a word, Sarah stepped up. "Langley has been using HOA funds to pay a construction company that he has direct ties to. That means every fine, every special assessment, every fee you've paid. It's been funding his personal projects. This isn't about improvements. It's about fraud." The room erupted. People who had spent years writing checks to the HOA, believing they were required to, suddenly realized they had been played. Voices rose, demanding explanations, demanding justice. Langley's smirk faltered. He stood up, raising a hand like he was still in control, like he could smooth this over. "This is ridiculous," he said. "These are baseless accusations. We followed every legal process, and..." "Then why don't the city records match?" Sarah cut in sharply. "Why do the signatures on the permit not match official records? Why is money missing from HOA accounts?" Langley hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. The people in that room weren't stupid. They saw it. They saw the shift, the way he was scrambling for a way out. Then the shouting started. Homeowners, furious at years of mistreatment, demanded answers. Some called for a full audit. Others demanded Langley's immediate resignation. He tried to defend himself, but the room had already turned against him. The air was charged, filled with years of frustration boiling over at once. Jake stood back and let it happen. He didn't need to say anything else. The truth had finally come out. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread through town about the case, and now everyone wanted to see Martin Langley answer for what he had done. The once smug HOA president sat stiffly at the defendant's table, his usual arrogance replaced with something colder, more calculated. But Jake saw it. Asterisk, the cracks in his confidence. Asterisk, Langley wasn't in control anymore. Sarah sat beside Jake, flipping through her meticulously prepared notes. "We've got him," she whispered. "Just keep your cool." Jake nodded, but he didn't need to be told. He'd spent months fighting this battle, and now, all that mattered was the judge seeing the truth. The proceedings started with the trespassing and property damage charges. Sarah wasted no time laying out the facts. She showed photos of Jake's destroyed farmland, evidence of the illegal road construction, and copies of Jake's land deed, proving there was no recorded easement. Langley's lawyer tried to push back, arguing that the permit authorized the project, but Sarah was ready. She stood, holding up the forged permit. "Your Honor, this document is the entire foundation of the HOA's claim, but we have proof that it's fraudulent." She handed the judge a comparison of signatures, one from city records and one from the fake permit. The differences were obvious. The judge adjusted his glasses, scrutinizing the papers. "Mr. Langley," he said, turning his gaze to the HOA president, "can you explain why this permit does not match official city records?" Langley shifted in his seat. "There must be a clerical error," he said smoothly. "The city approved this project." Sarah didn't let him off the hook. "Then why does the city have no record of it? Why is there no official approval? Why is the contractor tied directly to your private business interests?" Langley's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed it. Sarah went in for the kill. She presented bank records showing how HOA funds had been funneled into a construction company Langley had financial ties to. The missing money, the fake permit, the manipulation of homeowners, it was all laid out, undeniable. Langley's once controlled expression started to crack. He glanced at his lawyer, shifting uncomfortably as the judge pressed for answers. His usual confidence, his smirks and dismissive attitude were gone. He wasn't untouchable anymore. The judge let the room settle before speaking. "Given the evidence presented, I am inclined to rule in favor of the plaintiff. The permit in question is fraudulent, the construction was unlawful, and the HOA has violated property rights. I am ordering an immediate halt to all construction activity and full restitution for damages to Mr. Callahan's land." The decision hit Langley like a brick. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to salvage what little control he had left, but it was too late. The gavel came down, and the fight was over. Jake exhaled, a weight lifting from his chest. He had won. The fallout was immediate. The moment the judge ruled in Jake's favor, the HOA's carefully maintained facade began to crumble. The court ordered all construction to stop immediately, the illegal road to be torn up, and Jake's farm to be restored to its original state. All at the HOA's expense. But that was just the beginning. Sarah had anticipated Langley's next move, an attempt to delay, stall, or appeal the ruling. But the evidence was airtight, and with the city now actively investigating the HOA's finances, Langley had bigger problems to deal with. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Sarah had already exposed financial discrepancies, but once auditors started digging into the HOA's books, they uncovered even more corruption. Funds had been misallocated, hidden in shell accounts, and redirected to consulting fees. That led right back to Langley. The HOA wasn't just guilty of fraud, it was guilty of embezzlement. News spread fast. Residents who had once blindly trusted Langley now saw him for what he was, a con man who had spent years bleeding them dry. At an emergency HOA meeting, homeowners demanded his resignation. Langley tried to talk his way out of it, claiming he was being unfairly targeted, that this was all a misunderstanding, but no one was buying it. When the financial reports were finally released to the public, it was over. Langley resigned in disgrace. The man who had once walked around the neighborhood like he owned it, the man who had bullied homeowners and steamrolled over Jake's property, was finished. And then came the criminal charges. The city's investigation caught up with him fast. Bank records, falsified documents, missing funds. Langley was facing fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power charges. His expensive suits, his smug smirk, his condescending attitude, asterisk, none of it would help him now. Asterisk. The HOA, now leaderless and exposed, had no choice but to comply with the court's ruling. Within a week, the construction crews returned, not to build, but to tear everything down. The illegal road was ripped apart, the damage it had caused to Jake's fields was being repaired, and every dime spent on restoration was coming out of the HOA's budget. As Jake stood at the edge of his farm, watching the asphalt get torn up, he finally let himself breathe. The fight had taken everything out of him, but he had won. Not just for himself, but for everyone Langley had ever screwed over. The HOA had spent years operating unchecked, abusing its power, treating homeowners like pawns in a game they controlled. Not anymore. The fight was over, but the scars on Jake's land remained. Winning in court hadn't magically fixed the destruction left behind. The road had been torn up, but his soil was compacted, his irrigation system was wrecked, and his winter crops were completely lost. The damage ran deep, both physically and financially. Langley and the HOA were paying for the restoration, but money couldn't replace a lost harvest, and it sure as hell couldn't bring back the time stolen from him. The first few days after the ruling, Jake worked alone. Rebuilding felt overwhelming. He spent hours out in the fields, surveying the damage, trying to figure out where to even start. Every piece of broken irrigation piping, every deep rut left by heavy machinery, every patch of earth where his wheat should have been, it all reminded him of just how close he had come to losing everything. Then, early one morning, a familiar old truck rumbled up his driveway. Tom and Evelyn Carter climbed out, shovels in hand. "Figured you could use some help," Tom said simply, nodding toward the field. Before Jake could even respond, another truck pulled in. Then another. One by one, his neighbors showed up. People who had once been too afraid to stand up to Langley. People who had been bullied, fined, and harassed just like him. But they weren't afraid anymore. They came with tools, seeds, supplies, and a determination that matched Jake's own. James and Linda Anderson brought bags of fertilizer. The Martinez family arrived with their teenage sons, who immediately got to work digging trenches to fix the irrigation. Others showed up throughout the day, some bringing food, others simply offering a hand wherever it was needed. At first, Jake didn't know what to say. He had spent so much time fighting this battle alone, so much time believing it was him against the world. But standing there, watching dozens of people working together to bring his farm back to life, he realized something. This wasn't just about his land anymore. This was about all of them. He grabbed a shovel and joined them. They worked until the sun dipped below the horizon, and when the day ended, the fields still weren't perfect, but they were healing. And for the first time in a long time, so was Jake. The fight had left its mark, but something had shifted in the community. People weren't afraid anymore. With Langley gone and the HOA exposed for what it was, homeowners demanded a complete restructuring. The board, once filled with Langley's hand-picked enforcers, was dismantled, replaced by actual residents. People who cared about the neighborhood, not their own wallets. Sarah had been right all along. Once the truth came out, the power balance shifted. At the next HOA meeting, the new leadership rolled back years of unjust fines and pointless regulations. The ridiculous restrictions, the arbitrary enforcement, the weaponized legal threats, gone. In their place, a homeowner-run system was put in place, transparent, fair, and accountable. For the first time in years, the HOA was actually serving the people, not controlling them. But the biggest surprise came when Jake got a call from Sarah. "Check your email," she said, her voice carrying the hint of a smile. Confused, he opened the message and stared. A crowdfunding campaign, started by his neighbors. The page was filled with messages of support, donations pouring in from people who had followed his fight. "You stood up for all of us. Thank you for not backing down. This is the least we can do to help rebuild." The total? More than enough to cover what the HOA wasn't paying for. Jake sat back, the weight of it all sinking in. He had spent so much time fighting, so much time standing alone, that he hadn't realized how many people had been standing behind him. This wasn't just his victory, it belonged to all of them. That night, as he stood on his porch, looking out over the land that was finally being restored, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about rebuilding a farm. It was about rebuilding a community. The seasons had changed, and so had everything else. Months had passed since the last piece of that illegal road had been ripped from his land. The damage had taken time to mend. The soil had to be turned and treated. The irrigation system had to be rebuilt, and the crops had to be replanted. But now, standing on his porch, coffee in hand, Jake could finally see it. His farm was whole again. The winter wheat had sprouted, rows of golden stalks stretching across the field, swaying gently in the breeze. The scars were fading, not just on his land, but in the community too. The HOA had been rebuilt from the ground up, and with Langley gone, people no longer lived in fear of baseless fines, forged permits, or manufactured rules. Homeowners had taken back control, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood actually felt like one. Jake took a slow sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle in his chest. The fight had been brutal, but justice had prevailed. The land, the home, the legacy that his family had built, it had been threatened, but he hadn't let them take it. He had stood his ground, and he had won. A truck rumbled down the road toward his driveway, kicking up dust. Tom and Evelyn Carter, as dependable as ever, were coming by for their usual morning check-in. Others would probably stop by throughout the day too, neighbors who had once been strangers but were now something more. Jake smiled. He wasn't just standing on his land. He was standing on proof that one person could make a difference, that when people stood together, no one could take from them what was rightfully theirs. Asterisk asterisk. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light over the fields, he took one last deep breath and stepped off the porch. There was work to be done, but this time, he wasn't doing it alone.